Hey y'all, Scott here, and I'm freaking out here. I was outside and I heard somebody say one of the numbers of my soch. Privacy is my #1 concern, alright? I don't want anybody to know anything about me. For Christ's sakes, I blur out my inkjet numbers. You may ask why I'm so keen on privacy. Where did it all begin? Well, let me ask you this. How the hell did we learn about Geist DS? That game was canceled. We weren't supposed to know anything about it, but now we know everything about it. Really, anything can get revealed at this point. Here's my blood type, damn it! Video games are a tricky bunch, and development of them can be wild. I mean, how many times have you seen a developer interview where they say, yeah, it was pretty easy? Any video game that makes it to market is sort of a miracle. The amount of working coordination that has to go into making even the worst games ever makes it unsurprising how many game projects never got completed. Whether it's due to the publisher, the development team, market conditions, a lack of resources, or any of these other fun words I found in the dictionary, thousands of video games since the dawn of time have been canceled before an official release and have never been publicly available. Some video game cancellations are absolutely shocking and disheartening, and others are Project Giant Robot for Wii U. How did Silent Hills not make it to store shelves but Mega Flarp did? Well, let's delve into the world of canceled video games to understand how this came out, but this didn't. Now, we can't look at every single video game that's ever been canceled, so this is more so a general roundup of a bunch of canceled games throughout history. Who knows, maybe in the future we can talk about more canceled games as a whole, or dive deeper into a specific cancellation. If you want to look more into games that have never seen the light of day, I highly recommend checking out unseen64.net. This is where the majority of information on these canceled games lies nowadays, and you're sure to find something wild here. The 8th generation of game consoles had some of the most infamous cancellations of all time, in my opinion, the most heartbreaking of which was Project Rap Rabbit. Please care. A failed Kickstarter campaign for a spiritual successor to Parappa the Rapper, with a goal of raising enough money to buy a nice cigar. After the Kickstarter failed at even getting close to not failing, they put development on an indefinite hold, which was a nice way to say it was canceled, of course. Are you fucking stupid? Now, what overshadows Project Rap Rabbit's cancellation? Well, not much, but this will do. Star Wars 1313 was supposed to be a huge leap forward for Star Wars games. It was going to be much more mature and leverage the power of the 8th generation consoles. But then Disney decided to go forward with the mission statement of the entire company. Buy Lucasfilm, cancel 1313. They shut down LucasArts and subsequently canceled all of their projects at the time, with Star Wars 1313 being one of them. Silent Hills, however, is possibly the most notorious cancellation of this generation. The Silent Hill franchise was just sort of existing at the time. The survival horror genre was kind of struggling, but then a free game was put out entitled PT, short for Playable Teaser. At the end, it was revealed to be the announcement for a new Silent Hill game being produced by Hideo Kojima and Guillermo del Toro. Like, that would ever happen. Internal conflicts with the publisher Konami and Kojima led to him leaving the company and Silent Hills being wiped from existence. Even with PT, Konami's trying their hardest to ensure nobody even thinks of that thing anymore by pulling it off of the PlayStation Store. After L.A. Team Bondi decided to work on, well, I can't say that. It was going to reuse a lot of the technologies developed for L.A. and feature comparable gameplay elements. However, this was set in 1930s Shanghai. Officially, only one screenshot was ever released, but full gameplay was leaked. Warner Brothers was originally going to publish it, but backed out later on. In the end, they really just couldn't secure a publisher and enough funding. Killer Freaks from Outer Space. This was one of the first Wii U titles revealed. Back when E3 associated itself with the year 2011, Nintendo officially announced the Wii U alongside a bunch of killer games. Pretty much the only concrete game they announced was Lego City. We got some third-party multi-platform ports promised, with many not coming true, the concept of Smash Bros. Coming out for Wii U and 3DS and not much else, some tech demos, and that was pretty much it. But Ubisoft announced an exclusive title of their own, that being Killer Freaks was a first-person shooter focused on shooting aliens and not much else. This was cancelled and reworked into Zombie U 1 year later. How the fuck? Project Giant Robot was a game created to make the Wii U gamepad seem worthwhile, and that was it. Just a tech demo for the system that was all about making a giant robot and wreaking havoc as it. It was announced alongside Project Guard, which did end up releasing as Star Fox Guard. I would have assumed that this was just a tech demo, but Nintendo kept reaffirming that they were intending on releasing it for the Wii U as a full game. And I'm sure we all know how that turned out. Just think where the Wii U would be if this game released. It's speculated that the Nintendo Labo robot kit was what came with this game. I don't think that's been confirmed. Imagine being Microsoft and saying no 3 whole times. Phantom Dust was going to be a remake of the original Xbox game, and they just couldn't do it. You see, the developer of the remake was doing well with it. They asked Microsoft for more money, they said no, and canceled it.
forcing the developer to shut down and lay off all their employees.
That could have gone better.
I mean, technically Phantom Dust did come out on the Xbox One, but they just remastered the original instead of remaking it from the ground up. At least they made this one for free as a nice little way to say, hey, it ain't get much better than this. Fable Legends was always a game I could count on never coming out. Each time I check on its development, it'd be like, it's coming. Whoops. Again, this led to the closure of the development team Lionhead Studios. Thankfully, with Scalebound, this game's cancellation didn't shutter its developers' doors, but it almost did. Scalebound was a game Platinum's wanted to make for years, and Microsoft finally gave them the opportunity to crush their dreams. Actually, both parties weren't too sure of the title as development progressed, and they were worried about meeting fan expectations, and they felt they bit off more than they could chew. Microsoft announced the game was done for by saying, Scalebound is cancelled, please buy Halo Wars 2. But nothing will ever top the amount of 3DS games cancelled. I would have taken a bullet for DJ Hero 3D. At the 3DS's announcement during E3 2010, tons of third-party games were revealed via logos, stuff like Assassin's Creed Lost Legacy and Saints Row Drive-By, but they were cancelled pretty much within the year they were announced, with barely any screenshots or footage to their names. Some speculate it was because 3DS sales were pretty slow near its launch, others assume it was because of 3DS hardware limitations or the audience of the platform just not fitting these games. Lost Legacy became Assassin's Creed Revelations, and Saints Row Drive-By became not Assassin's Creed Revelations, that's for sure. I mean, I probably wouldn't have bought these games if they did come out. It's cool if they would have, but these just aren't the kind of games I wanted to play on the 3DS. Imagine that. All these games, and I was still just gonna buy the 3DS for Pilot Wings Resort. Ubisoft probably asked themselves, what the hell are we doing here, and pulled the plug. DJ Hero 3D was going to be the most immersive DJ Hero yet. Literally, it was gonna be DJ Hero on the 3DS. What a world we would have lived in. The demo was playable at E3 2010, but in early 2011, Activision canceled the entire Guitar Hero franchise and its spin-offs. No more games were in development due to declining sales, which meant DJ Hero 3D, it wasn't gonna make it. Bomberman for 3DS. It was announced, the developer Hudson Soft got absorbed into Konami, it didn't come out. Kaio King of Pirates was some penguin game that was made by Keiji Inafune, who worked on the Mega Man series before he left Capcom. It was revealed in 2011 and was cancelled a good 4 years later. Apparently it would have played like a Warriors game, but the reveal trailer was all we really got. And I don't know why, but this penguin is lodged in the back of my brain and something that might pop in my head if I think of the 3DS randomly. On the topic of Keiji Inafune and Mega Man, let's shift over to Mega Man Legends 3. It was announced in September 2010, but barely. The game itself wasn't really announced, rather the prototype of the game was announced. They were gonna put out the prototype on the 3DS's eShop when it launched in the summer of 2011 to gauge interest in the title and to receive feedback. That never happened, and they just canceled everything, the nerve of them. But hey, at least it wasn't Bioshock for the Vita. You wanna know how much we got on this? Just that. That's it. That's all we got. It never came out. Man, imagine what it's like to be Bioshock Vita. The 7th generation of consoles, back when DJ Hero After Party was cancelled, they had no mercy. Heroes the video game. If this game came out, okay. If this game got cancelled, okay. I have absolutely no opinion either way. Prey 2. Now, that was a game that was seemingly cancelled for no reason. It was apparently due to business politics and the sort. It was announced in 2011 and looked pretty good, and then Bethesda said, nah, it looks like trash, and cancelled it in 2014. Before the cancellation, the original developer Human Head was taken off the project, and it moved over to Arcane, where they pretty much started from scratch before the project was ultimately scrapped. However, Arcane was able to develop their own take on Prey, and that released in 2017. A Warrior's Lair would have been a PS3 and Vita game, with the main gimmick being switching between the two consoles to pick up where you last played. But who cares about that when Bonk Brink of Extinction and Clay Fighter Call of Putty were cancelled? This was the big retro revival era of downloadable games. I mean, were you really expecting them to not try to reboot Bonk and Clay Fighter? Bonk was another victim of the Hudson absorption and was cancelled because of it. And Clay Fighter? I don't know, it just stopped existing. A first-person Avengers game with an emphasis on co-op by THQ. Now, when I think THQ, my mind immediately goes to games on par with Wall-E for PlayStation 2, but near the end of their tenure, THQ was trying to turn the company around from mostly cheap licensed kids games to some bigger, better titles, with the Avengers game being one of them. It honestly sounded fairly promising, but THQ was just refusing to make a profit during this time and ended up having to scrap the project due to a lack of funding. TimeSplitters 4. This game just kept on getting the old yeah it's happening treatment whenever people asked about its status, because we really never knew much about it. Some teasers here and there, some information like, oh yeah, it's gonna use this engine or gonna be on this platform, but nope. Project H.A.M.M.E.R. Now here's a title I can get behind. What the f is a theater rhythm? No thank you. I'll stick to Hammer game. I mean, look at it. What else did you expect from that title? You swing a hammer around to whack things. It was originally for the Wii, being developed by Nintendo Software Technology. They're a studio in North America who developed stuff like Wave Race, but after Project H.A.M.M.E.R. got canceled, they've been banished to making just Mario vs. Donkey Kong games, a fate worse than death. This game was revealed at E3 2006, and that was it. No more information, this was all Nintendo wanted to show us. After its cancellation in 2009, NST tried to make a new Wave Race game for the Wii, and that got shut down, but at least we saw the minis march again. Super Mario Spikers was supposed to be a new sports game in the same vein as Mario Strikers, an extreme take on soccer with Mario characters. But Spikers was to be an extreme take on volleyball and wrestling, Jesus Christ. It was done by Next Level, the same guys behind Strikers, and it was cancelled in 2007 due to being a bit too violent for Mario. A gritty, more mature reboot of Kid Icarus was being developed for the Wii by Factor 5. This thing wouldn't stop getting rumored about back in the Wii days, but yeah, it was a thing, and I am very glad that Kid Icarus Uprising got made instead. Look at this guy. Mega Man Universe was a famous example of the great Mega Man cancellations of the 2010s. We already talked about Legends 3, but that was barely even in development by the time it got canceled. Mega Man Universe was going to be a downloadable Xbox Live Arcade and PlayStation Network game that allowed players to create and share their own Mega Man stages. It was heavily based on Mega Man 2, but featured its own god-awful art style. It was pretty much done from what I could gather, but Capcom pulled the plug on it on March 31st, 2011. Great timing. Then there was the canceled Maverick Hunter, the first-person Mega Man X reboot, just what everybody wanted. Metroid Dread was always one of the most mysterious games that never released. It was never formally unveiled, but it was never formally canceled. It just sort of showed up as a rumor from Game Informer in 2005. Apparently, it was a 2D Metroid for the DS. Rumors floated around for years, and even an Easter egg made it into Metroid Prime 3, stating, "The Metroid Project Dread is nearing completion." Nintendo denied the rumor that they were working on a 2D Metroid, but the series producer eventually stated that the project did exist at one point, but was scrapped. Just like My Life Coach on the DS. Katamari, Geist, and Gauntlet games were all planned for the DS, but these were all cancelled, with Gauntlet being the farthest along, as in, it was completely finished and they canceled it for some reason. It was actually going to be a very impressive game for the DS. Both screens would display 3D graphics at the same time, it had local and online play, and online voice chat. But hey now, the PSP had some canceled games too, like Far Cry, Saints Row Undercover, Earthworm Jim, and a Resident Evil game announced at E3 2009. Technically, this one was never actually canceled, just nothing's come of it, but mark my words, Resident Evil PSP will eventually come out, I swear. Rainbow Six Patriots, that was canceled, but it became Siege, so it's fine. The 6th generation had way too many canceled games to count, so we gotta pick the games to discuss wisely here. Big comfy couch on Xbox. With Microsoft buying Rare, most of their projects in the works for the GameCube and Game Boy Advance either had to be reworked or canceled. One of the most infamous being Donkey Kong Racing, a bit of a successor to Diddy Kong Racing. With Rare being a Microsoft company after the buyout, they couldn't develop for Nintendo home consoles anymore, so they tried to rework Donkey Kong Racing into Saberman Stampede. That didn't come out either, so move over Donkey Kong Racing, we got laid instead. Rare games couldn't catch a break this generation, especially Conker's Bad Fur Day 2 or Conker's Other Bad Day. A sequel to the original was planned but ultimately got cancelled, similar to another Conker game worked on for the Xbox, Conker Gettin' Medieval. This was more spin-off than sequel though, being a third-person shooter. There was Velvet Dark, a cancelled spin-off of Perfect Dark following Joanna Dark's sister, and then various Banjo-Kazooie games. One was planned for the GameCube, if this GameCube tech demo Rare put together is trustworthy enough, and others were planned after Microsoft bought Rare. Banjo X was going to be a remake of the original Banjo-Kazooie that would change dramatically as time went on to surprise players. This kind of reminds me of Conker Live and Reloaded, a remake of Conker's Bad Fur Day that did change some things here and there, kind of poking fun at being a remake. There was also Banjo-Kazooie, which focused on building your own vehicles, and that became not Donkey Kong Barrel Blast, that's for sure. XGirl was a girlfriend simulator planned for the Xbox. That would have been great. You would just have a virtual girlfriend. It's everything my mom wouldn't want. Fallout Extreme. This sounds interesting. I'll look it up on Wikipedia. Fallout Extreme was in development for several months in 2000, but was canceled. I blinked, what? A tactical game for the Xbox and PS2. It didn't get too far into development and was never officially announced. Now, Sonic X-treme was a pitch for a Sonic skateboarding game on the Xbox that went nowhere, but a Skater Die reboot did go somewhere alright. You know Skater Die on the NES, right? That thing that wasn't good? Well, Criterion, who made Burnout, worked on a reboot and it actually looked pretty promising. And I have absolutely nothing backing this up, but it was being published by EA. It could have been linked to the eventual creation of Skate. Charlie Brown's All-Stars. If a baseball game featuring this Charlie Brown model seems like your thing, I have terrible news for you. Before Retro Studios worked on Metroid Prime, they had loads of other games in development for the GameCube, including NFL Retro Football, Thunder Rally, and Action Adventure, but the most well-known canceled retro game was Raven Blade, an epic RPG that was scrapped to make room for old Prime over here. Castlevania Resurrection was being developed for the Dreamcast and was going to be in the style of the Nintendo 64 Castlevanias. It was canceled because, remember, Dreamcast. But hey, at least over on the PS2 and Xbox, Konami was working on Contra Online. I wanted to talk about Miss Pac-Man Maze Madness 2, but I have nothing to say. The 5th generation of consoles. Lots of cancellations during this just due to being a big transitional period for developers, going from 2D to 3D. Lots of projects just ended up not working out. Sonic X-treme, not Sonic X-treme, Sonic X-treme is one of the most famous cancellations of this era. The Sega Saturn didn't have its own original Sonic platformer, and X-treme was set to be the big Sonic title for the system. However, development was brutal, especially on the employees working on the game, with some getting incredibly sick. Sega had to delay and eventually cancel the game due to development just not progressing well in any way. But to help make the cancellation sting a little less, they put out a Saturn version of Sonic 3D Blast. Me. It was obvious Sega wanted to combat Mario 64 with their own 3D Sonic platformer on the Saturn, but Nintendo was already planning to strike back with a sequel to Mario 64, never mind. A big element of Super Mario 64 2 would have been multiplayer. Luigi would appear in the game after being absent from the first one alongside Yoshi being rideable. This would have appeared on the Nintendo 64 DD, the disk drive, an add-on only available in Japan. But because nobody owned a 64 DD and the sequel's development just wasn't really going anywhere, work on it was scrapped. But it's fair to say elements from the game were definitely used on future Mario titles. Nintendo was working on so many games for the 64 DD, and because the add-on flopped hard, these games either just released via a standard cartridge, were reworked into games on future platforms, or were just straight up canceled. The Nintendo 64 had a lot of interesting cancellations overall. Tons of third parties pledged their support but eventually dropped out, obviously because of the limitations of the 64's cartridges. Contra Spirits, Ghosts and Goblins 64, Doom Absolution. There's not much that exists in the form of concrete images or videos of any of these, but they were being worked on at one point, which is about all there is to say. Quest 64 would have gotten a sequel if all hell broke loose, and Glover 2 was only canceled because, well, the game was a big enough success to warrant a sequel. The publisher bought way too many cartridges of Glover 1, so they had like 150,000 of them laying around unsold. They didn't want to deal with more Glover. A Nintendo 64 version of Advance Wars and Fire Emblem were being worked on, but were either eventually scrapped in the case of 64 Wars, or reworked into a new game with Fire Emblem. But outside of the 64, there's Thrill Kill, a PS1 release that didn't. It was apparently so controversial, they just didn't want to deal with releasing it. It ended up getting leaked online and got passed around like crazy, and look at that, we're not all murderers with Thrill Kill out in the open, we're fine. A few Game Boy Color games never made it to market. South Park was originally going to appear, but was canceled due to these two things just not making sense demographic-wise. Moving on to the 4th generation, and things are definitely slowing down. Not as many massive cancellations. Star Fox 2 would have been an obvious game to talk about, but Nintendo decided to finally release it in 2017 via the SNES Classic Edition. Who cares about it? But we might as well cover it. Obviously, the sequel to Star Fox, and it was canceled simply because it was releasing in the latter half of the SNES's life. It would have looked puny and weak compared to the 3D consoles at the time, and the Nintendo 64 was coming out with a Star Fox game of its own in development. But whatever, this game wasn't canceled. We're talking Kid Kirby today. Supposedly, it was going to use the SNES mouse and feature Kirby in his prime, an origin story. It was going to be developed by DMA Design. That's Rockstar Games, they worked on a Kirby game at one point. Dream was the basis for what would become Banjo-Kazooie, but the original game developed by Rare for the SNES and then the Nintendo 64, yeah, that was not this. An RPG in the style of the original Donkey Kong Country. This is pretty crazy as a Super Nintendo game looks-wise. It's a shame the original version of the game never saw the light of day. Now, I gotta talk about the Virtual Boy cancellations. Come on, Donkey Kong Country 2 was gonna be on this thing. That would have been terrible. GoldenEye 007 as a racing game. Alright, sure. VB Mario Land. It apparently would have played very similarly to standard Mario platformers, but it would have had wackier camera angles with an overhead shot being used once and Mario walking between the foreground and background. It would have been cool, but oh my god, this is slow. And finally, let's end things off with the 3rd generation of consoles. We could go over the 2nd and 1st generation, but what am I gonna talk about? out. Oh no, Dukes of Hazzard didn't come out on Atari, no. Earthbound, or Mother 1, or Earthbound Beginnings. The first Earthbound was intended to come out in North America, but never did, probably due to the cost of releasing an RPG on the NES near the release of the SNES, just wasn't worth it. Nintendo of America sat on a full English translation of the game for years until it finally released as Earthbound Beginnings on the Wii U Virtual Console. Donkey Kong's Fun with Music. This was a music educational title that taught everybody how fun music can be with Donkey Kong involved. It's actually pretty cool because Pauline is seen here as a vocalist, which she was in Mario Odyssey. Return of Donkey Kong was a game listed as a release in a few official Nintendo publications. It never surfaced, and we don't know what a game called Return of Donkey Kong would have looked like. If I had to guess, I'd say this might have been a temporary title for Donkey Kong Classics, which was a compilation of Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. I don't know. SimCity was fully created for the NES, but just never released. Same goes for the California Raisins game and Sunman. Sunsoft was gonna make a Superman game, they lost the license, they went through the trouble to rename the game Sunman to just end up not releasing it, But none of these will ever compare Street Fighter on the NES. Yes. So those were just a few canceled games throughout history, but far from all of them. Who knows, like I said, maybe we can return to this topic eventually, or even take a look at specific canceled games themselves. But as of right now, I'm a little more concerned with maintaining my privacy. How does it look on me? If Guys DS can leak, who says my blood type and hair color can't? I might want to go a step further. Maybe a little more. Just a little more. Hey all, Scott here. In my spare time, I like to pit two entities picked at random against each other. Let's see what the first fighter is. Okay, it's gonna be myself, guilty as charged. Let's see who's next. Okay, Gizmondo widescreen. I already compare myself enough to that every day. What's the category we're fighting in? This isn't even Gizmondo widescreen's first win. The Wii U actually released. What did you do today? 250 games/babies are born every minute. They're both bustling industries. But because of how many games start development, it's fair to expect a good chunk of them to never reach completion. Game projects get canceled. It happens. They're such complicated pieces of media that sometimes things just end up failing to come together. But if games are so complicated, how complicated are the cartons you play them on? Listen, I'm not trying to downplay how difficult video games are to work on, but the video game consoles themselves, that's a whole different story. To successfully create a video game platform, a company has to talk to hundreds of other companies to see what they want out of gaming hardware, make deals, get games to come to the platform, get exclusive games in development, advertise the system itself alongside the games for it, create unique features, menu systems, all for a reasonable price. Developing a game system not only requires the creation of hardware, but fundamentally requires getting multiple other games in development, and because of that, not a lot of people make game systems as a hobby. I mean, EA could probably put out their own platform if they wanted to, but I have multiple questions, and they're all, why would they do that? There's a reason only 3 big console manufacturers exist now, and whenever somebody else tries to enter the ring, everybody can't stop laughing. It is incredibly risky to create a video game platform. With how much money has to get poured into not only creating the hardware, but funding exclusive game development, it's obvious why it's a 3-man game. But that's not to say others haven't tried or the big guys haven't attempted to launch other consoles with plans falling through. Canceled game consoles are some of the most elusive portions of video game history. I mean, even if a company is developing a console and things aren't going too hot, I mean, Jesus, man, you've already spent this much money. Just release it for kicks at that point. A game that's never seen the light of day, we're all pretty used to that. A game console itself, though, that's a bit more rare. Full platforms that were planned yet never saw the light of day, and what do you know, one of them happened to be Atari Game Brain. Oh yeah, of course, the Atari Game Brain. Can't have video games without the Atari Game Brain. The Game Brain was designed to play 10 of Atari's games at home. Pong, Super Pong, Ultra Pong, Video Pinball, the classics. This was in the era of the Pong console. Cheap little consoles you could buy that do one thing and one thing well, play Pong. The Game Brain was a bit different though. It was sort of a Pong console, sort of a regular video game platform. See, it would have had cartridges and you could play different games by swapping out the cartridges. But it would only be able to play those 10 games. It wasn't designed to have a limitless library of titles. It was fundamentally a Pong console with a few variations of Pong you could select, but those variations would have been sold as separate cartridges to be... They decided against releasing the system because, I mean, the Atari 2600 was already out at that point. Who wanted this? Well, Atari was not one to shying away from releasing game consoles because around this time they were developing a handheld system, the Atari Cosmos. The big selling point of this thing was going to be its holographic display. It was 1981. From what I could gather, the Cosmos had only 9 games planned for it, and all of them were pretty much programmed into the system itself, kind of like the Game Brain. The cartridges you would use to activate the games contained the holograms, which I believe were pretty much those 3D looking pictures that move when you do. So one of the games was Asteroids. I believe you'd be playing Asteroids with a 3D looking picture in the background. Well, at least it wasn't the Intellivision 3. There's a reason these two things never came together. The Intellivision, Mattel's competitor to the Atari 2600, had a phone controller. It'll always have that against me. The Intellivision 2, Mattel's answer to fan demands for another Intellivision. It was a cheaper version of the Intellivision. I love their use of 2. But the Intellivision 3 was supposed to be a true successor, like a next-gen system. What the hell was the point of calling this one 2? But no, the Intellivision 3 wasn't the real next-gen system. That was going to be the Intellivision 4! Intellivision 3 was just to hold consumers over until that fateful day. I have specifically thought to myself, I will never legitimately say this, but Mattel lost their minds. Let's go back to Atari. You ever use the Atari 2600 and say, I wish it would sit on my lap? Well, they almost had you covered. The CX2500 and CX2000, these were to be budget versions of the 2600, but this time with the controllers on the console itself. Sure, I mean, I'm open to bullshit. There was going to be the Atari 2700, which was basically a version of the 2600 with built-in wireless controllers. You could buy a wireless adapter for the original system, but sadly this variant never saw the light of day. Then they worked on the Atari Mirai, which is famous for nothing. The system's purpose was never known. All we know is that somebody found the outer casing and it never released. That's it. Things would be truly different if the Atari Mirai actually released. For starters, I wouldn't be talking about it right now. But the Konix Multi-System has one leg up on the Mirai. It has like this much more information out there. You could have gotten a chair with it. The system was supposed to be the most immersive thing on the planet. It had so many different controller configurations, force feedback, a chair you could have gotten with it. This was supposed to be the ultimate video game system. Half of this stuff seems like the fake kind of video game accessories you'd see people playing with in movies, but this was real life. Konix pretty much bit off more than they could chew with this thing. They crammed so much in here that it just wasn't feasible to release. The multi-system faded away, and the remnants of the project were purchased by Atari and eventually became the Atari Jaguar. Good. Speaking of the Jaguar, Atari was creating a system alongside it called the Panther. But this was scrapped to put more resources into the more powerful system. Listen, I love hotel rooms. You get free water bottles and bed bugs, but what I love most is when you have those hardwired video game controllers connected to the TV where you could play games for a small giant fee on your hotel bill. Well, what if there was a console that was like playing hotel games at home? The Taito Wow Wow Woo Woo was already copyrighted. It was going to play games off of CD, or for a small fee, you could download games via satellite. It's a hotel in the home. This was canceled probably due to budgetary reasons. At the time, it was a bit expensive cramming a CD-ROM drive and a satellite receiver into one console. Around the same time, Bandai was trying out their own CD-based game console, the Bandai HAT, or HAT, or Home Entertainment Terminal. You guys know me, I love video game console names that sound like airports. So this was pretty much a Super Famicom with a CD drive and in the form of a laptop with various other features that I have no idea how they'd be used. It was portable and had a stylus for Super Famicom games. So why was Bandai making their own Super Famicom? Well, this isn't the most obscure thing out there. Various third-party companies have produced their own version of video game hardware with the permission of the original companies. But that's the thing, I don't think Nintendo wanted this. A Super Famicom you could use a stylus on. Yeah, you can also play it on the bus, I guess. And that brings us to one of the most well-known canceled game consoles of all time, or in this case, add-ons. Sega released the Sega CD add-on for the Sega Genesis. CDs were the future, after all. Nintendo looked at that and said, oh man, we need to f*** up too. They partnered with Sony to make the SNES CD, an add-on for the Super Nintendo that would be able to play games off of a CD. After Nintendo reread their contract with Sony, it was lame, so they partnered with Philips instead for this imaginary CD add-on that never came out. That's the excuse everybody gives when they're hiding something. The SNES CD add-on never came out, regardless of it being manufactured by Sony or Philips, but through the initial first partnership, Sony created their own version of the SNES with the CD add-on built in, the Nintendo PlayStation. Well, thank God Nintendo killed the deal with Sony. They definitely saved some money by not releasing a CD add-on and instead created their biggest competitor ever, who they've consistently lost to time and time again. At least it didn't make the Atari Jaguar Duo. Oh my God, Atari, piss out. Atari reigned supreme in terms of most unreleased shit. The Jaguar Duo was simply combining the Jaguar and Jaguar CD add-on to create something you didn't want to play. Now, Sega originally had plans to create a console in between the release of the Genesis, Sega CD, 32X, and the Sega Saturn. That would be called the Sega Neptune. This was to be a Sega Genesis with a 32X built in, a 32-bit cartridge-based console, not to be confused with the Sega Saturn, a 32-bit CD-based console, or the Sega Jupiter, another canceled 32-bit cartridge-based console, or the Sega Pluto, a canceled Sega Saturn with the Netlink adapter built in. I took an astronomy class once, this was all I took away from it. Around this general time was when Nintendo was working on a new handheld entitled Project Atlantis. It had a whole bunch of this in 1995. That wasn't gonna work. So they held off on the core concept until the Game Boy Advance in 2001. That's the thing, a lot of these canceled systems were just a bit too ahead of their time. That's comparable to the Panasonic M2 back in '96. It may have included DVD playback, and this Hasbro thing. It was canceled around the same time, this one focusing on VR. Like, come on, DVDs and VR in '96? Half of these systems were being made by companies who just couldn't do stuff like that. Cutting edge graphics. Hasbro. All these handhelds never came out because, yeah, I mean, handhelds may have been an easier investment than big boy home consoles, but Nintendo cornered the handheld market. Get out of here, Nano Gear. The Infinium Phantom, a console for playing PC titles. What? It was supposed to be released back in 2004 and would have been a digital-only console. You just downloaded the games. Yeah, it was fairly ahead of its time, and because of that, they kept delaying it until they lost all their money. Can you believe a company called Infinium wasn't trustworthy? But then we have the Panasonic Jungle. Yes, Panasonic has had quite the history of consoles, going from eek to yikes to what? The Jungle was going to be a handheld for playing MMOs. Good for them. Of course, I don't want to make fun of these consoles too much. They never came out. It's rude to mock things that never officially released. It's like making fun of a fetus.